from Fox. So to talk a lot more about where this case is now headed, now that we have this official charge, I do want to bring into the conversation legal analyst Neama Rahmani. Neama, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, we spoke to you about, several times even during this fire as it was going on, but now we're at a place where an arrest has been made. But I want to start with you personally. You're there in Southern California witnessing some of the effects of the Palisades wildfire firsthand. Now that they've made this arrest, what are your initial thoughts seeing that investigators have really had a long time running up to this?
Christina, I live and work in Los Angeles, and I have so many friends, loved ones, family members that were affected by the fires. My sister had to evacuate and stay with us. So many people lost their homes. They're calling, texting me this morning saying, I can't believe that this was arson. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't rekindling of a New Year's Eve fire. So folks are justifiably upset. They're enraged. Obviously, they're happy that justice is being done finally, some 9 to 10 months later. But really, you have an individual now, Rendernick, who's been accused of causing the most costly, the deadliest fire in California state history. And even though we're at the beginning of criminal justice, it certainly won't change the fact that so many people still have been displaced from their homes here in Southern California.
Certainly. And so there's this picture once again there on the screen. But I have to say, Neama, what really interests me about this case is some of the external factors tying it together. All of the things that Jonathan has since been accused of. In fact, the fact that he was suspected of being an Uber driver working that night, according to those authorities. And so when it comes to sort of playing into what happens next in the courtroom, I'm sure geolocation and then even Uber, they have some part of information and data that might share to connect the pieces there for the prosecution. As a former federal prosecutor yourself, what are you looking at when they brought some of this evidence up in that press conference?
Well, Christina, first I'm looking at Uber and who are they hiring, right? The passengers report that this individual was agitated when he was completing the ride. And as soon as the ride is completed, reportedly, he starts this fire on January 1st. So, I'm not saying Uber has any civil liability here, but they've always taken the position that these aren't employees. We don't have control over them. And the company's been accused of their drivers sexually assaulting individuals, being reckless. And now, this is really a terrible look for the company at a minimum that someone completes an Uber ride, then commits a felony act of arson resulting in death. And let's not mince words. This may be a death penalty case ultimately, immediately after that Uber ride. So, with respect to some of the other allegations, obviously, that technology is going to matter, not just the Uber ride itself, but Rendernick's cell phone. He calls 911 allegedly after starting this fire, then records the firefighters fighting the fire. And I don't know if he's a pyromaniac of sorts, but he seems to have some sort of interest in fires. There's some allegations of images being generated on ChatGPT, obviously, the French rap song that you mentioned. So there's going to be a treasure trove of digital and forensic evidence on this film, not just related to the fire itself, but Uber, the cell phone, and a lot more here, Christina.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned the ChatGPT. We do have this tweet as well from Matt Finn from Fox News Channel saying that federal investigators say the man responsible for the catastrophic Palisades fire, Jonathan Rendernick, asked ChatGPT last July to create this, quote, dystopian image that shows a forest burning on the left and people running from it. In the middle, people in poverty. In the right, the rich watching the world burn. Federal officials say that Rendernick maliciously started this fire on January 1st at the LFAD, ultimately put out, but again, it rekindled about a week later, ended up killing 12 people in the Palisades wildfire and burned 68,000 buildings as well. So we have these images on the screen there. I just wanted to make sure as we're talking about it, folks at home can also see what those federal prosecutors are alluding to. So ChatGPT, the entirety of that, it's such a new technology that's been entering our world. Have you seen it in being used in any court cases potentially other than this? Because if this is brought in as evidence, it could truly be interesting to see where the law sits it, and is it even going to be allowed ultimately?
It will, and this is a great question, Christina. I'm getting it a lot, and obviously great reporting by Matt Finn. He's one of the best. But ChatGPT, owned by Microsoft, everything you put into that phone, it's discoverable. People think, they're talking to their therapist or their lawyer, they're getting advice. Well, it's not privileged. So now we're seeing just the beginning of it being introduced in cases, and people are saying, well, hey, I thought this was confidential. Well, it's not. It's no different than any other internet search. You can go on Google, Yahoo, Bing, doesn't matter, right? DuckDuckGo. If you put something in your phone, you're searching for something, you put something in ChatGPT, Christina, that is absolutely discoverable. There's no privilege that applies. So we're really seeing the technology come into play, right? It's going to be Uber technology. It's going to be Microsoft, which owns ChatGPT, whatever his cell phone carrier is, right? They're going to get into that iPhone or that Android. All those technology companies are going to be brought into this case because it's going to be a big case, not just here in Southern California, but a case that the entire country is going to be watching.
And Neema, do you think that we'll hear that 911 call that he allegedly made before this eventually gets anywhere closer to court? Is there possible that that could be released?
I think it will, Christina. And that goes to that guilty mind, that malice, that intent. Here's someone who, again, allegedly lit the fire, wanted to watch it burn. Those images generated by ChatGPT of a city in flames. This is someone that really took pleasure reportedly in what he was doing. And why does it all matter? We know that motive isn't an element of the crime, but it's something that can be used at sentencing. And the arson itself, we're talking about 5 to 20 years. But again, this may be charged as felony murder ultimately. So if you commit arson and someone dies, that's a felony resulting in death. So that's murder under federal law. And of course, murder under federal law carries the possible death penalty. Now, he's only been charged on a complaint. He hasn't been charged by the grand jury yet. So the complaint just is in place to get him arrested and get him from Florida back here to Los Angeles. But they haven't gone to the grand jury to get an indictment yet. But Christina, I expect a lot more serious charges than arson here, at least manslaughter, but likely murder.
And that's where I was going to ask you next. And so, with these potential charges on the table, Neema, we know that in the court system, sometimes prosecutors will offer a plea deal. Do you see that taking place in this instance? Or is the sense of just justice and the public's need for justice likely going to prevent that from happening?
I think there will be a plea offered, and this is why. I'm not saying this is the best defense in the world, but there is a defense here, and it's the following. He started a fire on January 1st. Firefighters put that fire out, but it was rekindled on January 7th, right? So there's a connection between the Lockman fire on the 1st and the Palisades Malibu fire on the 7th. The defense is going to try to argue against causation in that case. They will say that the fire department was negligent, they didn't put it out. It was the elements, the drought, the heat, the wind that caused that January 7th fire. So when you're talking about legal causation, there's two important principles. The first is what we call but-for causation. But for the January 1st arson, would the January 7th fire have happened? But the second part is proximate causation. And that is the following. The acts of January 1st have to have been reasonably foreseeable to cause the larger fire on January 7th. Now, obviously, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I believe they were, but expect the defense to argue very aggressively against causation in this case, and just maybe try to negotiate some sort of deal down from murder to manslaughter, maybe something closer to 20 years instead of life in federal prison, or even worse, being on death row.
And that would be a major update in this case. Neema, before I let you go, I do want to lastly ask you about some of these civil lawsuits that are potential. We do know that in big cases, oftentimes after an indictment is officially brought, maybe by those in the government or whoever else, some of the families are also going to be seeking justice. Do you foresee any of these potential civil lawsuits not only affecting maybe Rendernecht himself, but other companies? We just named Microsoft with ChatGPT, Uber, all of those. Are they also liable to be tied into anything in the future?
I think the families are going to want to try to bring in these deep pockets. So there were two fires that happened on the 7th. The first is the fire that we're talking about, the Palisades fire. And this arrest actually hurts the civil cases there. And this is why some have filed against the city of LA and the Department of Water and Power, saying that they were negligent. Well, there's broad governmental immunity there. Those were going to be very difficult cases. I don't think they were going to be successful. But now you have the argument in that case, and a very good one, that it wasn't the city at all that was responsible for this fire, but an individual arsonist. So, to the extent that those Palisades and Malibu cases weren't dismissed based on immunity, and if they even get to jury trial, now the city is going to have a very good defense that this was a criminal act and that individual should be responsible. And of course, Rindernick, I'm guessing, as an Uber driver, I say this respectfully, probably doesn't have billions of dollars to pay those families. Now, there's a different fire in Altadena and Pasadena that was caused by Edison. So those civil cases will go forward, and I expect them to be successful. There's already settlement discussions and a fund being set up by the same person who actually administered the 9/11 fund. But as far as the Palisades and Malibu fires are concerned, and civil lawsuits, and those victims being made whole, I think today's arrest is criminal justice, but I don't think those homeowners are going to be able to recover from Rendernick or anyone, whether it's Uber, Microsoft, or anyone really with the ability to pay here.
And Neema, even watching some of this video back from, honestly, a lot that we aired here on Live Now from Fox, still heartbreaking to see the communities that were damaged by these fires. We certainly appreciate Neama Rahmani, legal analyst, for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Again, with you having such a connection there in Southern California to understanding the impact, we'll continue to see and watch this case as it moves forward.
Thank you, Christina. Great being on as always.